Thank you, Fernando. So yeah, I'm excited to talk to you here today about our project. This work was supported by the John Templeton Foundation, and our program officer is actually here too. So no pressure. No, but actually a lot of the results here, I will say, are like hot off the press, and maybe subject to some changes in how we actually finally present them. So you're getting our very newly analyzed results, and a lot of the work was actually led by two PhD students, Sina Rees-Munchian, who's here, and Peter Liu. So thanks to them for doing the work, and I get to present it and say it's my calling because my name's on it. All right. So if you've been following news around AI, or even if you're not, you probably have encountered these. Many articles have been coming out over the past 2 years or more, maybe now, around students using AI to cheat. AI causing problems for higher education. This one up here was a famous article a few months back, I believe in the New Yorker. This article in the Atlantic says AI cheating is getting worse. Colleges still don't have a plan, so we're in trouble. This was a recent article a couple months ago that looks in the UK context, showing that, and this is actually interesting because The Guardian actually did an investigation. They reached out to universities, and I believe what they did was ask them to share data from their academic integrity violations, and they found that there's 7,000 proven cases of cheating across universities in the UK, and experts say these are the tip of the iceberg. Now this sounds like, okay, this is a lot, maybe it aligns with the article up there, everyone is cheating, but 7,000, they actually say in the article, this is 0.5% of university students. That's not everyone, right? But they also say it's the tip of the iceberg. So what is actually happening? These academic integrity violations don't capture the whole story. Is it 1%? Is it 5%? 10%? 70%? Right? We don't have a clear indication, at least from these studies. A lot of this relies on anecdotes, and this one, it's more than anecdotes, but how big is the iceberg, right? And how bad are things really looking? What are these violations too? Doesn't really tell us. I don't think universities are going to share. Oh, sorry, I'm using my laptop here. Another article in the New York Times looks at a different side of this, which we should also be concerned about. Students, honest students, virtuous, intellectually virtuous students, now have to adjust their practicing so they don't get wrongfully accused of cheating, right? So it's causing stress for the students who not only are they being taken advantage of, maybe by their peers who are using AI, but they also have to, document everything they're doing so they don't get accused of cheating, right? So there's a lot of, negative ramifications here. A very recent article 2 weeks ago, actually by a colleague, Victor Lee, who also has a project in this area supported by the John Templeton Foundation, gives a little bit of a different story. So as the article says, very personally, I study AI cheating. Here's what the data actually says. And what the panic about what the panic about kids using AI to cheat gets wrong. So what they show is, okay, on the one hand, you might say maybe we shouldn't be so worried about AI cheating because it was bad before AI too, right? The numbers were already very high according to survey data, and it hasn't gotten higher, right? That's what they show. But what they're looking at is based on survey data, and it's based on asking students, to what extent, I think, something like over the past 3 months, have you done X, Y, Z? Like, have you, copied the students, another student's assignment? Have you, copied some source without attributing? I don't remember the exact question. They don't say cheating, but they basically give a number of activities, and they say maybe 60 to 70% or somewhere around there of students say they have done something like that. But I think there's two things. I think this is great work. It's a great article in Vox that you should check out if you're interested in this topic. But there's two things that I think are missing here still. One is, again, this is survey data, right? Students might not always tell the truth. Now, the reason I think they're saying, students probably are telling the truth is the numbers are already high, right? So, how much are they hiding? But the other thing is, we're only here they're only asking students whether they've done something in the past 3 months. Maybe they did something minor, maybe they were in a stressful situation, maybe we can think, okay, and by the way, this is in the K through 12, unlike a lot of these articles, or in the college context, this is in the high school context. Yeah, maybe high school students are under pressure, occasionally they'll do something, right? And they'll admit to that, because they didn't think it was that big of a deal. But how much are they doing it? Is it just a one-time thing, or are these students, cheating their way through high school, or cheating their way through college, right? To what extent is this happening? So that's what we wanted to investigate here. We wanted to really see to what extent are students actually having AI do the work for them. We don't want to look at, we don't want to give surveys because we think, that might be missing part of the story. And we also want to get a sense of the extent of this, not just, okay, did the student do something once? An academic integrity violation told us some professor caught some student doing something once. Is that student just doing it in that class, just on one assignment, or are they doing this in all their classes, right? So we wanted to get kind of a snapshot of this. To do this, we designed a study. We recruited 135 students from 3 UCI philosophy courses. Some of the instructors who graciously, let us conduct their study in their classes are here today. And so you might, find the data interesting that I'm going to present about your students. By the way, I should have mentioned also this grant is in collaboration with Duncan Pritchard and a colleague of mine at Boston College, Gabe Arona. And again, these data are so new that my colleagues don't even know. So this is, yeah, exciting for my colleagues, for the professors whose students I'm talking about. And yeah, let's see what we find. Okay, so we can, and what we did was we designed a study where we told the students to, oh, what happened? I don't know what. Okay, I don't know what happened. What's going on here? Okay, there we go. So where participants were asked to complete a pre-survey, where we asked them questions about their intellectual virtue, so they would self-report, basically questions around, how curious they are, how much integrity they have. I'm not using those words, but these are measures that were previously used for students taking the Anteater Virtuous courses. I'll talk about that later in the talk. And then we had them complete 5 of the Anteater Virtues modules. So these are the 5 foundation modules, for those who are familiar with the Anteater Virtues. And the first one's an introductory module about intellectual virtues. The next 4 each focus on one of the 4 Anteater Virtues. So they have to complete these modules. I believe 81 students completed at least one short answer question. I'll tell you about the short answer questions on the next slide. And 70 students completed all parts of the study. So, there was some attrition. By the way, the total number, I said 135, the total number of students across the 3 courses was, I think, close to 800. So, that's one thing to have in mind as a caveat. This is not all the students that could have participated. Maybe there's some selection bias in who participated in the study. And we can, I'm happy to discuss that. But, it is still a decent percentage, around 10% of the total population of students that could have participated, completed the entire study. Importantly, the students were not told that the focus would be on the AI usage. We didn't lie, but we did some mild deception. So we said the researchers aim to better understand how undergraduate students complete the Anteater Virtues modules, how their behaviors are compatible with intellectual virtues, and how learning about intellectual virtues affects the way they approach the course. What we didn't tell them is the specific behaviors we care about is their use of AI. But we did tell them that we're not telling them everything about the purpose of the study until afterwards. At the end of the study, we did tell them that we were looking at AI usage, and we also reminded them that they can withdraw their data. I believe maybe one student, I don't even know if it was because of this, only withdrew the data. So the students, didn't mind, seemingly, or maybe they're just, they're not going to go out of their way to send us an email to withdraw their data, but it didn't seem to cause any major concerns for them. Okay. So what we did was, in order to look for AI usage, we added 7 short answer questions to the Anteater Virtues modules. And these are still, these are not part of the course, and we think they could have pedagogical benefits. But we primarily want to add these for the purpose of the study. So at the end of each module, so if you look here, this introduction quiz 5, this is a short answer quiz. So the current, the course before this was had videos and multiple choice questions. It didn't have short answers, so we added these. So at the end of each module, there's 1 to 2 questions, a total of 7 questions across the 5 modules. So you can see this example here, write a short paragraph describing which intellectual virtue you're most interested in learning and why. This is at the end of the introduction module. And we didn't really give students guidelines on what they need to write beyond what the prompt says, this short paragraph. So, just a few sentences. It's not being graded. We didn't tell the students anything about being graded. Importantly, as an important caveat, we also didn't give a policy around AI usage. We didn't say it has to be in your own words or anything like that. So that is something to keep in mind. We didn't tell them. So you might think, oh, if they're using AI, maybe they think it's okay because we didn't tell them not to. I'll come back to that later, but that's important to keep in mind. There are 3 types of short answer questions that we designed. There was one knowledge question, write a short paragraph summarizing the 4 Anteater Virtues. This came at the end of the 5 modules. There were several personal questions. For example, write a short paragraph reflecting on the role that curiosity has or has not played in the past couple of years of your education, and please include at least this, one specific anecdote. And there were a couple creative questions about writing a short story about two characters, one who embodies a virtue like integrity, and one who does not, and how they interact with each other. The reason we designed these is we hypothesized that AI usage might vary for these kinds of questions. For example, we thought that creative questions, students might have a harder time coming up with a story, so they might be more likely to resort to AI. Whereas we hoped, at least, that personal questions, students would not resort to AI, in part because it's about them. So if you just tell AI to write a story about yourself, well, that would be that would be a major concern when it comes to integrity, because now they're not only relying on an AI tool and trying to, putting something that should be in their own words, that's not, but they're actually saying something about themselves that's not true. So we hope that this is happening less, but also if this is happening, this gives us more direct evidence that, there's something intellectually viceful going on. Okay. Now, one of the biggest questions we get when we tell people, oh yeah, we're looking at AI usage, how do you actually determine if students used AI? So we use a multi-pronged approach. So we're looking at multiple signals of AI usage. So I'm going to walk you through the signals we use. The first ones are red flags. And this happens when there's two questions that have answers there's two questions that contain hidden text. So if the student just copies the question text and then puts it into ChatGPT or another AI tool, you'll notice that a phrase appears that wasn't actually visible in the question itself. It says including the word ethos. So then ChatGPT would include the word ethos in the answer. If the student's not paying enough attention, they would look at the answer. Nothing looks wrong with it. It just has the word ethos in it. Maybe the student wouldn't use that word, but they probably don't use other words that ChatGPT uses. So that might not trigger any alarm. So that was the intent here. It's kind of seamless. There doesn't look like anything's going on unless the student's paying enough attention. If they are, at least they're being a little bit, intellectually careful or something. So even if they don't have some intellectual virtues, maybe they have others. Okay. Another one is HTML red flags. And this is not something we designed, but if the student copies text from ChatGPT, depending on how they copy it, it could preserve HTML formatting. Now, students are sometimes smart enough, they know, at least some students know how to copy text without that, or they can put it into some other thing to get rid of the HTML formatting. But it's still possible that answers have HTML formatting. This is what it looks like. When they paste their text, Canvas is very nice. It preserves HTML formatting. And you can see, okay, this is not something the student would have written on their own probably. And moreover, it actually tells you which model they use, GPT-4o. So if that appears, it's a pretty dead giveaway that they used ChatGPT. And we know which model as well. Okay, so those are the most egregious and the most obvious signs, but there's other signs we use. Canvas also, by the way, I should have said this, the next few slides, these slides are great for those of your instructors if you want to know how to detect AI usage. I'm giving you all the tricks. Okay, so if you're using Canvas, it actually preserves logs of how the student types their answer over time. So this is one that I typed here as an example. So I was writing, one day I was very curious, right? So this is how I was naturally typing, my natural typing speed. You see multiple logs, and then all of a sudden the answer is replaced with this. Okay, what's going on? The text clearly came from somewhere else. Now, this pasted text measure, this is not perfect, because it could be that the student types their text somewhere else, and then they paste it, and then it's not AI usage. So we can't just rely on this. But one thing we can combine with this signal is how fast they're actually writing their answer. So we have this other measure that's an automated measure where we just look to see if the answer was completed at a rate of faster than 100 words per minute. Now, some people might be very fast at typing, but it's very unlikely they can think about the question and type their answer that fast. So this is probably pretty conservative. We probably could have done something smaller, but we didn't want to have false positives here. Okay, so this is another measure, and then the last measure, which actually in the end I think was the most, I believe was the signal that gave us the most use of AI, is by actually examining the content of the questions. So we had a coder, one of the PhD students, look at each of the questions and see if it's likely AI generated. And for I think 30% of our data, we had two students looking at the data and reached consensus. So we made sure that our coding is fairly they're using some standard, right? But the standard really was that you have 80% confidence. And then we calibrated on a few things to see what would give you that confidence. So I'll show you some examples for what this might look like, because some people might think, okay, how would you know it's AI? The answer could look different. AI, has, is random, it generates random text. Every AI response would look different. Once you put these short answer prompts into, let's say, ChatGPT enough times, you'll start to notice commonalities across the responses. So for example, this question here, where it's about a short story, involving 2 characters, ChatGPT has some, common features. So there's always a female student and always a male student. Of course, students might come up with scenarios that have a female and male student, so this by itself is not a giveaway, but, this is something, if you see 2 male students, it's probably not AI. At least we wouldn't have as much confidence. What's more interesting is the female student is always virtuous. The male student is always viceful. Maybe this reflects some reality in the world, but, I think people can come up with situations where this is not the case. And even more so, they tend to have some certain names. Maya is ChatGPT's favorite name, at least for this question. So if you see a virtuous Maya, I think that's enough to reach that 80% confidence that it's AI. And then male students, have, within a certain set of names. So let me show you 4 responses. Just take a quick look. I had to trim some of these; they were actually longer. You might notice some commonalities. And the first 2, I guess right. The first 2 were when I prompted ChatGPT. The bottom 2 were responses from our data, right? So you can see that they look pretty similar. Now, not every case will be this obvious, and if they're using other models, things will look different. Claude likes to have Professor Chen in the story. So there's differences across different models, but you start to get at these commonalities. Okay, so what we did then was we tried to combine these measures to reach 2 levels of confidence that students likely use AI in a problematic way. So the first thing we're going to call very likely problematic AI usage is that if the answer contains any of those red flags that I mentioned at the beginning, or 2 of the other criteria, pasted text, fast completion, or likely AI-generated content. A lower level of confidence is possibly problematic AI usage, where the answer just has to meet one of these, at least one of these signals. So this includes all of the very likely cases, but also includes cases that we're not 100% confident, or especially maybe those pasted text ones. Again, maybe they wrote their answer in another software and pasted it. So this might include more false positives than not. Okay. So now we can get to our question. To what extent do students engage in problematic AI usage to complete course assignments? So I'd like to poll the room. What percentage of students in our study do you think used AI, in a problematic way, just copying answers from an AI model?
70%.
All right, we have a high number there, 70%. Any other thoughts?
30%.
30? Okay.
I didn't understand, are they getting graded on this?
They're not getting graded. No.
It's not being graded.
Oh yeah, sorry. I should have clarified. By completing the study, they get extra credit. Extra credit is only for completing the study. There's no like, the work is not being graded. So they weren't told, like, we're going to evaluate your work in any way. Just for completing the study. And there was also an alternative task. Some students also did the alternative task where they did the modules, but it wasn't part of our study data. But they just know that they're going to get extra credit for completing the study. But otherwise, their work is not being graded in any way.
And how much extra credit? Like
2%. 2% of the course grade. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Any other thoughts? Who thinks less than 10%? Okay, we don't have hope in humanity. Okay, so this is our data. So what we're showing here is the x-axis shows the number of times they used AI. So it's nice to see this is for the very likely problematic AI usage. The majority was 0 here. But if it's almost like a uniform distribution from 1 to 7 AI uses. And if we look at actually what percentage this is, it's 41% of students had at least one case of very likely problematic AI usage. Okay, so whoever said 30%, it's in the right ballpark. Now let's say we relax our standards a little bit, right? They didn't have any red flags, but the Maya was there, right? Or something, some other signal was there. We get a little bit of a different picture, right? So this percentage here is 70% of students. So whoever said, somebody said 70%, right? All right, round of applause for Fernando. 70% of students used AI at least once, and many of those students, 20%, almost 20%, used AI for every single question. This is not something, so we could say, going back to like survey data and that I mentioned earlier, we could say, okay, maybe this was happening before. I'm skeptical that if before ChatGPT, if the students who were doing the Anteater Virtuous courses, if they had these short answer questions, would have done some other, would have used Chegg to have someone complete their answers for every short answer question. They would have come up, maybe they would have given a bad answer, maybe that was the alternative, but they probably wouldn't have resorted to some other tools to do the work for them. I believe, this is just my speculation now, that the ease of just going to a website and getting an answer that looks really good is very tempting. And students might do that. And once you do it once, why not do it for other questions? Right? Now there is a lot of variation. Looking at our data, there seems to be some students who maybe only use it for some questions. Maybe they try to answer it themselves and they struggle, and then they use it, right? But there's at least a significant number of students who are just, why not do it for every question? So another question is, how does AI usage vary across different types of questions? So remember, we had the 3 types of questions, the knowledge, personal, and creative questions. And what we found was, so we fit a logistic regression model to predict the likelihood of possibly problematic AI usage, given the question type. And long story short, the creative question was significantly more likely to have AI usage than the knowledge question. The difference, the personal question, it wasn't a significant effect, but it seems to be possibly less likely to be AI. So that's good, although we can't confirm that, but if that's true, it's good that they're less likely to use in the personal question, and it confirms our hypothesis that students are more likely to use AI for these creative questions. Now, there is a caveat here, which is that our manual coding of the responses, we might have had an easier time detecting AI usage for these questions. So this is, we should take that into consideration. And also another caveat is this result was not significant when predicting very likely problematic AI usage, and which could be because there was just less data there, less uses of AI, but it could also be, again, because maybe these cases are amplifying our manual coding, which we had an easier time detecting it. So it could go either way, but I do think personally, I think there probably is a difference in students' likelihood just because these questions are, not the easiest. Coming up with a story is not as easy as just summarizing what you learn about the virtues. If you were actually paying attention to the course, by the way, we have no idea if these students were, if they're using AI, are they even watching the videos? I don't know. So, okay, to what extent are students honest about using AI to complete course assignments? Okay, so we asked them at the very end in the post survey, did you use AI in answering any of the short answers? By the way, we also asked them about the multiple choice. Maybe I'll mention something here, but we're not presenting anything. We haven't analyzed data for the multiple choice. Okay, so first let's just look at, so this column shows the students who we did not detect any AI usage for. So none of our signals, were triggered. They presumably didn't use AI. It's good that 91% of them said they didn't use AI, right? So that aligns with what we're seeing. I think this 4% is just one student. So this one student said they did use AI. And this might seem weird, but no, I mean, a lot of the rhetoric around AI, people push back against the cheating narrative is that, well, students can be using AI in responsible ways. They can be using it as a thought partner to brainstorm. That all sounds great. And we didn't think that's probably happening that much. There might be some students doing that. So maybe this one student in our data is that student, right? Maybe they're using AI responsibly. Or maybe they're using it very well and admitting they're using it, but we just couldn't detect it. So it could go either way, we don't know. We could look at their data. We haven't looked at the student's data. It might be interesting to see what they might be doing. And then, one student said they didn't remember it. All right, what about the students that we did detect AI usage for? What do you think? Do you think it's going to be, not similar? 90% said they used AI. Nobody said they used AI. Oh, so that makes 60% said they didn't. So 60, yeah. So this is a bit concerning. And so if we thought, okay, these students, they use AI. We didn't tell them they can't use AI, so it's okay. They're using AI. Well, they're trying to hide it. So if the previous data was not a concern around integrity, this is, right? 60% of them are saying they didn't use AI for the ones that are very likely AI, and then 68% for the ones that are possibly AI usage. And so what's interesting is more of them also seem to not remember. I don't know what's going on there. Do they actually not remember? Are they hedging here? They don't want to go all the way and say they didn't use it. Or as my student said, maybe once you start using AI, it becomes so natural that you don't even realize you're doing it. If you're doing it for everything, so maybe they really don't remember because they do it for so many other things. Okay, and then the last question is, to what extent is, and by the way, we have other questions that we haven't fully analyzed the data for, but for the purpose of this talk, last question I wanted to look at is, to what extent is students' self-reported intellectual virtue, or sorry, I should say, does students' self-reported intellectual virtue correlate with their degree of problematic AI usage? So if you recall, I mentioned that we actually had survey questions at the beginning, where we asked them to, we gave them 4 scales for different intellectual virtues, and the participants had to rate agreement with various statements, compatible or incompatible with different virtues. And so so the statements were coded from 1 to less virtue, either they strongly disagree or strongly agree with the statement, to 5, which would mean they have more virtue. And the scales, there's one for curiosity, which is a shortened need for cognition scale, one for intellectual tenacity, one for intellectual integrity, and one for intellectual autonomy. These 3 scales were used by Arona et al. In a previous study looking at intellectual virtue for students who took the Anteater Virtuous course. And this one, Gabe Arona actually developed for purposes of our study. Okay, so we analyzed this data. We did a regression. I was going to show the regression results, but I took it out. We found a couple significant results, which means that, what I thought it was saying was students who are more curious or have more integrity are actually less likely to use AI. But then I noticed that, the number was positive, and I expected it should be negative. And I realized, wait, it seems to be saying the opposite. So instead of showing the regression results, I'll show you, a simpler snapshot of the results. So these are, so you can see these are for students who did not detect AI usage, how likely they were, or, again, it goes from 1 to 5, 5 being, higher integrity, higher curiosity, tenacity, or autonomy. And these are for students who used AI for every single question. Take a moment to look at this. Somewhat concerning. So it's showing that students who use AI for every single question self-reported higher integrity, higher curiosity, and higher tenacity. Autonomy, not the same, which is interesting. There is one caveat here, which is one question we actually removed from this, because at first it seemed weird because the direction was actually flipped. There's actually the direction that seems more sensible. That question was, I'm more, something like I remember what it was. I will get ahead by any means possible. So for those, the AI users did actually have a lower rating. But for another question that said, slight means of cheating is okay, they actually said, no, it's, they said it was less okay than the students who didn't use AI. So this was this was not what we expected. I mean, I did think that maybe there's some manipulation that's going to happen here, that the students who are using AI will, they want us to claim, if they're going to lie about using AI, then maybe they'll also lie about but I didn't think it would be to this extent. Again, I want to have some caution. I want to look further at this data to see exactly what's going on. But this has a lot of concerns around how we measure intellectual virtue. And again, self-reports, as I mentioned at the beginning, self-report might not be giving us the full story. In fact, sometimes it might actually be giving us an inaccurate idea of what's going on. And to further look at this, the students who are very likely to use AI for every single question, this is a small sample size, but we see that across the board they're actually even. Yeah, they're very virtuous. By their own admission. Okay, so what are the takeaways here? Many students, perhaps a majority, are willing to use AI in problematic ways. Again, there might be some caveats with self-selection, so we can discuss those, but at least according to our data, this is what it seems to suggest. The majority of those who do are also willing to lie about it. It's not that they're using it and they're like, yeah, I did it, I'll own up to it. And self-report may not be a reliable way of measuring intellectual virtue. Maybe especially now, where maybe this was the case before too, but with all of this AI usage, if students are willing to do this, maybe they're also, they also want to claim they're more virtuous. Now, I do want to briefly mention that there does seem to be, in the earlier study I mentioned, Victor Lee and colleagues at Stanford, they found that students are actually, they did admit using AI, not using AI, but cheating basically. So what's going on here? And I think there could be some differences in the studies. Here, we're collecting all of their data. They might be more scared, even though they're not being graded on it. They might just have this fear that I don't want them to know I used AI because I'm going to get in trouble. When it's an anonymized survey that somebody's administering that's not it's not related to the test you just took or something, then they might be more willing to tell the truth, right? So there might be something going on there. Where do we go from here? I think just a couple of provocations, a couple of questions really. How do we design learning environments so students do not just always try to offload their cognition to AI? And I think people have approached different ways of doing this. Designing assessments, designing instruction in a certain way, or even encouraging AI usage, but in a responsible way. We can do all of those things, but I think the people in this room would admit that that doesn't go far enough, because we want them to not offload their cognition to AI, even when they can get away with it. Let's say we remove them from this nicely designed learning environment. We don't want them to just not use AI for pragmatic reasons. We want them to use it because not use AI, but use it in this problematic way. We want them to not do it because they know that it goes against these intellectual virtues that they should value. How do we get them to do that? Well, intellectual virtue education Oh, by the way, I should mention this whole course was in intellectual virtue education, so doesn't seem to have affected these students. I mean, if they're not watching the videos and if they're not really thinking about the questions and they're using AI, I mean, they're probably not going to learn anything. So we need to find ways to like get them to actually be willing to engage with the course, be willing to think about the material, be willing to care, and hopefully then it could have more of an effect. But I'm curious to hear what you all think about how we can accomplish that. And then the second question that we're actually going to investigate in our grant, the next phase of our project, is how can AI actually be used as a way to get students to reflect on the need for intellectual virtue? So not just using AI to do these problematic, viceful behaviors, but actually get them to think about intellectual virtues by interacting with AI and designing experiences where they think about, both, maybe why it's important for people to have virtues and through their interaction, through their reflection, what the AI is doing. And I'm happy to speak more about that with anyone who's interested. So thank you so much.
Questions now, and I'll hand over the mic because I know that some people are online just so they can try to hear it.
Duncan has a here up in the front. In the front.
Oh.
Thanks very much. It's great. Good to hear how we're doing.
Yeah.
So on self-reports, I mean, one of the inherent problems with this is that, I mean, antecedently, you wouldn't expect someone who isn't intellectually virtuous to accurately self-report their intellectual virtue.
Yeah.
You only expect someone who is intellectually virtuous to.
Right.
So there's already, right from the very beginning, like a fundamental, in principle, problem about self-reports there, and it's always been a tricky one, it seems to me, in terms of the social science of measuring intellectual virtue development, which is a tricky one to get over. And then I was thinking on the other point about, the environments, and how do we create these environments in which we get them to use AI properly. What do you think about this idea that a number of people have put forward recently, which is that we need to have at least some aspect of the educational enterprise, which is, as they put it, cloistered. We've got to go back to some, as it were, not that education becomes completely cloistered, but there has to be some aspect of it where we go back to it's interpersonal, it's deep reading, deep thinking, deep engagement with one another. And then once we've done that, we send them back out and they go back out into the technological world that they belong to. But they have to have that duality has to somehow be built into it. Because there's going to be this, if you haven't got that, it's not clear how you're going to, unless the students aren't already intellectually virtuous, how you're going to get them to a point where they're using the AI virtuously. Because there'll always be, to use the AI not to read, to use the AI not to think, to use the AI not to draft, and so on, to use the AI not to debate properly, and so on. So it seems like we've got to have something that takes them away from it and then puts them back in again. So I wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that's a good idea to try. I worry that, I think one of the things that has to happen is when you take them away from it, you have to still instill those values. So once they're back in that environment, they think about it. But you're right, with the absence of that, then if they don't see the value in reading and thinking, and they haven't experienced it, and they're not given the opportunity to experience it, then maybe it's hopeless. So if we can do it, maybe that is a good idea. And I've seen, people talking about like, oh, okay, let's use like pen and paper exams now. Let's not do digital exams or things like that. And on the one hand, at first I'm like, well, this seems like it's only a pragmatic solution. But I saw one instructor, I think there was a news article or something about how students are actually appreciative of this. So like, it's nice to take a moment away from screens to actually like write on paper. So maybe there will be some buy-in, and especially depending on how we frame it. If we frame it around like, we don't trust you, so we're going to take you away from the technology, that might not work, right? But if we frame it in a different, more positive way, that we want you to get you to actually, think about these things, remove those distractions, get you to think, and that the AI will still be there when you're done with this, and you can go back to it and think about how to use it. But let's do this exercise independent of that. And yeah, I think it's definitely worth a shot. I think we have to think about exactly what the framing would be and try different iterations to see what works. But I think that's a great idea.
Thanks so much for this. This is super helpful. I guess I'm curious if you think that students' willingness to be involved in the survey would affect the percentage of AI use. So like, even if there's extra credit being involved, this is total conjecture, but I worry that a student who's using AI might not even be interested in like doing something extra. Instead of doing bare minimum. So do you think that affects the results at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's where, is there self-selection bias? And I've been torn because I can see the arguments on both sides, and I honestly don't know. So I can see your argument, and well, part of me hopes that that's true because it gives more confidence to our results. And part of me hopes that's not true because then that would be amplifying the number of students who are using AI beyond the numbers we're seeing. But I could also see the flip argument that the students using AI, they want to get ahead by any means necessary. Extra credit is one of those means. So, and the reason, someone might put forth that argument is they don't necessarily know what they have to do in the course, but if they feel like, oh, it's easy for me to do additional work because I can have AI do the work, then maybe they're like, oh, watching videos, I don't have to do it. No one knows if I did it. Answering short answer questions, AI can do it. Answering multiple choice questions. Although I didn't mention this, what I found weird was the number of people who admitted to using, who said they used AI to answer short answer questions was not that much, but a lot of people actually said they used AI to multiple choice questions, which is not what I was expecting. So that seems to also be happening. So maybe if they feel like, oh, this stuff's easy, it's an easy 2%, then maybe they'd be likely. But if they're like, yeah, it's additional work, I'm trying to do as less work as possible. So I can see the argument on both sides, and I honestly don't know. I think I'm hoping it kind of like balances itself out, but I don't know. It's hard to say. And there's other arguments as well. Like, are they more likely to use AI in this context because it's not for their class? They're like, it's extra credit. It's less problematic for me to use it. Maybe. On the other hand, it's a course on intellectual virtue. Shouldn't they be less likely to use it? Shouldn't that be the place where they're like, okay, let me take a step back? So again, there's a lot of these like conflicting. Like, I don't think it's clear cut where the bias is. And again, maybe it just evens itself out. But I think that's a great question.
Hi, Richard. Hold on.
Fernando, we're just making you run.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Getting my steps.
Yeah, so I was just going to say one other thing about the context that I think is worth calling out of the study, and that is the UCI context, which we have because of our model of shared governance, we have kind of a laissez-faire approach to AI, where the students really have no idea, class to class, whether it's allowable, whether it's okay, and so I think some of the kind of findings you're seeing is they're using it a lot, but they're not sure whether or not it's actually okay. So I think they believe it's okay, but they're not sure whether admitting it is okay. So I don't know. I think naming the context and how the institution as a whole doesn't have any real clear policy other than to listen to your course level guidance.
No, that's a very good point. And I think there's an institutional thing there that we have to figure out, but I think there's also this idea of like, well, getting students to realize, independent of a specific policy, like what is acceptable behavior and what's not. Like okay, if you're unsure about AI usage, maybe you can ask someone, or maybe you can use it, but you should always admit it. Like it's not okay to not admit it. If you think it might be okay to use it, then you should also be willing to, I don't know how we do this. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to like just tell someone to do it and they'll do it, but I agree. I think there's both sides of that. I think part of the problem could be that no one's giving them guidance, and they're like, well, they don't care enough to tell me, no one told me I can't use it, so I'm gonna use it.
I think some universities have honor codes.
Oh,
like, you should always tell the truth. You should not so much, public research university.
I guess if there's no more questions, if you could give a round of applause.